Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to start the second panel session of the day. The theme for this panel is the new 3R's of education, learning to reduce, reuse, recycle in tourism, hospitality and events education. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Duncan Marson, Senior Lecturer in Tourism here at the University, who will lead this session, and I will let Duncan explain a little bit more, and over to you.
Thank you very much. That's great. Well, thank you very much, colleagues and friends. It's great to see everybody here, and it's great to have an opportunity for discussion, really, in terms of what's been a very turbulent time, both within obviously hospitality, tourism, the events industry, and also within higher education as well. I guess that today, and hello for those of you online as well. Hopefully, the way that I've structured this particular presentation today, nobody will be neglected, because we're going to use the wonders of modern technology to maybe add to this. If you've got an interest in pedagogy, i.e. that kind of study and I suppose what I describe as the art and science of teaching and learning, then hopefully you'll be interested in this next particular hour. I'm not really presenting today, I guess, in that sense. What I am is a moderator, because I'm more interested in what everybody's thoughts and feelings are regarding this. And obviously there's quite a few people in the room and there's quite a few people online as well. So it's making sure that we kind of have a conduit for which to gain all this wonderful information and thoughts and opinions regarding some of the current issues of the day. And hopefully the mechanism that we're going to use today kind of attributes to that as well. Hence, we're using kind of Mentimeter today, but I'll go on to that in a second. Actually, I might as well go on to it now. If you have got a smartphone, for those of you online in particular, and for those of you in the room as well, thinking about anonymity, as I always do, and with ethical considerations, with not data collection, but I guess it is data collection in that respect. You can go on to menti.com, and it'll ask you a little box in there to enter a code. And if you enter the code, as it says up there, 178597220, you'll be able to follow, hopefully, the presentation, and I will guide you down this route. And you'll also be able to put in your own comments as well. Now, whilst you're doing that, the idea of the comments actually is, when I was approached to do this and undertake this type of moderation, yeah. Menti.com. When I was asked to undertake this as a moderator, really in some respects, it's a bit of a data collection exercise I wanted to do, a qualitative data collection, really, I guess, where I wanted to give the opportunity for everybody to have their say, and then have a conduit for it, to store it a little bit at least, to use it as an opportunity for ICE and for all of us to utilise it for the future, which is an important thing, I think, and particularly for those of you online as well. And so that's hopefully the conduit we're going to use today. The thing that I love about opportunities like conferences like this and people coming together is it does provide us with the opportunity a little bit to come up with some real practical solutions with some of the stuff that we hear. That's the thing that I love about this, I have to say. It's the thing that I love about coming together of this and meeting all partners and friends and colleagues and collaboratives and so on and so forth. It provides that opportunity to maybe think about how we can practically implement some of the stuff that we hear about. And of course, that has inevitable challenges to it, but I'm quite interested in looking at that option. So I've already started to make notes from this morning, where, for example, I've already discussed with Chris, with his presentation on the idea of virtual field trips, the opportunity of working through ICE maybe to develop a suite of collaborative virtual field trips that potentially everybody can use. Only one institution has to produce one, technically. And then we've got, let's say, well, a load of institutions potentially with different destinations. And that potentially can be a conduit for it. Yeah, it's, you know, just from that kind of stuff. And of course, that practical implication, implementation, is a difficult one. Let's see if technology works. No. It does? It's all good. Perfect, that's excellent. The other one as well, actually, from this morning that I heard regarding about sustainable food initiatives and things. I'm going to have a word with the Programme Lead for Hospitality Management in the university, because I think there's a great opportunity where hospitality students can actually work on the sustainability initiative with student wellbeing located centrally in the university to provide all students in the university with an opportunity in looking at sustainable food consumption, but also from a wellbeing perspective. I think that's a great opportunity there. And that's the thing that I love about this, really, is how we can develop those practical implications of ideas. So we can almost, having that ideas forum in which to build upon. I am today going to be focusing on a bit more about teaching and learning in that particular sense. And we're going to be focusing on this concept that I'm going to go into in a second: reduce, reuse, and recycle. Ironically, we're not going to be looking at it from an environmental perspective. But like I say, I'll come on to it in a second. For those of you who don't really know me that particularly well, my name is Duncan Marson. I'm the program leader here for International Tourism Management at the University of Derby. I'm also a senior lecturer in tourism here. My little bio and links there. It's a little bit old at the moment, so it says my last publication was in about 2013, which isn't the case.
It also says you're based in Buxton.
And it also says I'm based in Buxton, does it? Well, there you go. And whose fault's that? That's mine. That's my fault. But that said, so my background, my kind of research background has been previously, I've got a background in adventure tourism, and that particular side of that I was really interested in, and sustainable tourism as well. And increasingly over the past years, I'm doing a doctoral at the moment, a doctoral in education, and therefore looking at pedagogy within tourism education is something that I'm particularly interested in. Particularly, I won't bore you with my research, but particularly from a popular cultural perspective, some really interesting stuff within there. Today, however, within this, and I love the sound of my own voice, so we're going to have to really keep just tapping myself on the shoulder slightly to get a move on. Good, thank you. Hopefully it provides us with the opportunity a bit to look at the future of tourism, hospitality and events management education, and how we can share a bit of best practice through people's thoughts and opinions. Now, I'll show you how we're going to do this over the next 40 minutes or so now, but hopefully it will give us a bit of an opportunity for everybody, like I say, to provide their own comments and thoughts and feelings, regardless of what it is. There is an element of anonymity here as well, hopefully, in the mechanism that I've chosen. So for those of you who want to say something, particularly online, if you want to say something particularly controversial, then you can do. Just be warned to everybody, the profanity filter is off. Okay? So what does that mean? You're allowed to swear? Well, I guess, if you want to. But just take that into consideration. Now, Mentimeter, probably most of you have used it, I'm assuming, before. Hence, what you do is you log into the actual website, you provide the number, and then it should be, at the moment, guiding you through the slides as I click through them as part of that. Just to give a quick example, just to see if things are working. To test the system, please provide a word that best describes you today through the word cloud. So there's a kind of word cloud thing. So if you provide one word on there that best describes you today, like I say, the profanity filter is off, okay? So there you go, platypus, we see, wombat, online, happy, Tasmanian devil, nice. Okay, there's some good animal-inspired components here, particularly kind of an Australian link there in relation to the platypus. Interestingly enough, interesting bit of knowledge about the platypus I learned yesterday, actually. Interesting ability that to come up. There's the only platypus that exists outside Australia is in the San Diego Zoo. Yeah, I know that's absolutely completely useless information for the majority, but anyway. Okay, so that's looking like it's worked, so that's good. Okay, good thing. We're going to be using Mentimeter. We're not going to be using the word cloud component. Although if you know how word clouds work, most people, or at least the majority of people, regardless, we don't know how many there are, being inspired and happy down there, which is great. I would think knackered would be quite bigger, actually, but there you go. That's good as well. So, what is the focus of today's session? Well, it's this: reduce, reuse, recycle. This was a form of branding, I guess, that was first introduced. There's a point of debate regarding this, but it's first introduced in the 1970s, early 1970s, I think, in the state of Wyoming, if I'm correct, by a US senator there, whose name was Gaylord Nelson. And he came up with the first Earth Day in the United States, where 2 million people also got involved in it throughout the US. It was distinctly environmental. Actually, the work that they did in Wyoming at that time in the early 1970s paved the way for things like the Environmental Protection Agency in the United States, which then, I think, developed the Resource Allocation Act, which is all about recycling as well. That's its background. Of course, the branding itself now is used in a variety of different ways. It doesn't just necessarily always just refer to recycle, reuse from an environmental perspective nowadays. And that's the kind of approach that I'm looking at today, in terms of looking at it from a higher educational perspective. So we're not necessarily really looking at the environmental side of reduce, reuse, and recycle within higher education. We're looking at them as more sustainable principles, I guess, today. Okay, because there are some quite challenging discussions. I love presenting at conferences because normally the people who are before you are quite boring, and therefore you can go into kind of enthusiasing everybody up. Having Peter beforehand does not help because it was particularly good. But it provides us with a bit of an opportunity. It is a difficult, as Peter's alluded to, it is a difficult period of time for all of us, not just in the industry, but within higher education as well. I don't want to bore you with a kind of more UK-centric perspective, but the UK higher education system is in this kind of a challenging phase at the moment. In 2019, there was a report released by the UK before, in conjunction with the UK government, called the Auger Report. And a number of things were stated in that. It was quite HE light, actually, the Auger Report, but it did have some notable policy recommendations in there for the future of education, which impacted upon higher education. One of them was the idea of trying to push the concept of lifelong learning. So moving away from this idea that universities, for example, provided 3-year courses where people had to sign up to a 3 or 4 year sandwich and a final year included in there. And instead, looking at the flexible options that may be available throughout higher education to provide that flexibility. And I think that's quite interesting in terms of what's been already discussed throughout the past couple of days, really, in terms of that option. So I wanted to kind of explore those issues rather than me go on about it, though, because that's pointless, really, because we've got this wide variety of experience in this room, far more than me. I wanted to provide you with the opportunity. So there's going to be a couple of statements on here, and hopefully the comments will come up. And I want to pick some of these out for two main points, really, or two kind of recommendations. On the one side, just to explore some of the future issues in terms of higher education within tourism, hospitality, and events, and looking at the opportunities that might present themselves. Where do we go in the future? And qualitatively, at least, it's difficult to do, but can we see a degree of consensus agreement within there, or is there a varying difference in opinion regarding where higher education can go over the next 5 or 10 years? Because we do need to prepare for it. It is a distinct challenge. Just to give you a UK context as well, there seems to be a big discussion at the moment in the UK regarding student numbers. Are they going up or are they going down? And particularly in programs like hospitality, events, and tourism. It seems to be the case that they have been going down since around about 2012 or so, and they've seen a rise, but only in certain markets. So like, for example, the 18-year-old or the post-18-year-olds have seen an increase, but in distinct age groups, they've seen a drop. Part-time students, you've seen a drop as well. And interestingly enough, people who essentially are working from a background in industry and mature students, you've seen a significant drop in the UK as well. I won't even get on to the idea of European students in the United Kingdom either, because of course Brexit has kind of given a bit of a hammer blow to that in relation to. But as Peter alluded to, there's always the opportunity of being a lorry driver, which I read yesterday. I didn't read £55,000. Actually, I read 70 grand that one company was offering. Yeah, HGVs for years, which is pretty cool. Yes. Yes, my application is already in there. I've really got the arms for it. But. So that's basically what we're going to look at. And I suppose in that sense, you know, that's something that we're all pushing towards. You know, that idea of, I guess, thinking about COVID-19 and the impact of it. When can we go back to that traditional appearance of this kind of the lecture theatre being a rather kind of busy place, a chaotic place in this sense? I kind of love that. I love the chaotic nature of it. I love the kind of talking that's going on. I love the kind of craziness of it, these type of things. You know, I kind of encourage argument and debate, as I'm sure you guys do as well, in relation to your lectures and tutorials and so on and so forth, where it really pushes the boundaries. It challenges you as well, you know, in relation to that, which is fundamentally important. Of course, COVID-19 has more resulted in this kind of thing, where essentially we see a distinct challenge. We see lecture theatres that are empty, we see whole campuses that are empty. of course. And inevitably, this has facilitated a move. It's facilitated increased questions as well regarding, well, what is the future of higher education? Is there a nature, for example, of increased electronic provision through either blended learning or distance learning, for example? And what should be the pedagogic model as a result that we move towards within things like hospitality management, tourism management, and events management as well? Is this essentially, you know, areas like lecture theatres, for example, will they start to be changed significantly now as a result of COVID-19? And of course, the changes within technology as well. Will that result in increased discussion and increased conversation regarding, well, how is our subject areas, how are they going to change for the future, which I think is fundamentally important. I only raised that because last week, and I've included the link here just in case anybody's interested, but there was an interview with Mark Zuckerberg. You would think he would have more on his time at the moment with all the controversies that are going on with Facebook. But a couple of weeks ago, he stated in a press release that he's going to hire 10,000 people to work solely on what's called the metaverse. And the metaverse sounds like something out of the Matrix or something out of a science fiction film. It's a really interesting concept, and a lot of organisations now believe that essentially it's the future of how we're going to access and utilise the internet in the future. And it's more to do with virtual reality. So you embed yourself from a virtual perspective in, like, fully immersed into a virtual environment. And that raises quite interesting questions regarding field trips in the future. I think that's what they want to do. I think tourism and potentially to an extent hospitality are key areas for that. Events already happens. You know, like, for example, if anybody has children or plays this themselves, of course, because it does. Fortnite, a game called Fortnite that's online. I don't play it myself, but I have friends who play it, and it just sounds like you run around killing people, I think. It's kind of that idea. But interestingly enough, there have been artists who have held events in Fortnite, in the actual online interactive environment. And it seems to be increasing in popularity, and that type of thing. Now, of course, the challenge with those discussions is, well, things like the metaverse and the changes within technological innovation, things happen slowly. So these are pipe dreams at the moment. How really are we going to look at this from a hospitality management perspective or a tourism event perspective? But I guess that's the point, isn't it? That's the point of ICE, and that's the point of why we're here. So we can share best practice and collaborate to prepare for those changes. And it's those practical ideas, really, that is kind of what helps shape that in many respects as well. So there you go. I guess the broader topic, you don't have to answer this one, but the broader topic today is how we can make some of the issues experienced in HE as a result of COVID-19 an opportunity as opposed to a catastrophe. You know, it's a kind of a serious issue in relation to that. When we look at the idea of student numbers, particularly when we look at student satisfaction now. I don't know if it's the same within other countries. Within the UK, I think I'm fair to say this, is that some programmes are particularly governed by the impact of what's called the National Student Survey and the responses and the satisfaction rates that the National Student Survey has on whether programmes continue. So programmes or universities, executives can make the decision to close programmes if you have that perfect storm of very low National Student Survey scores and also low student numbers as well. Ironically, they're less inclined to make those decisions if you get low satisfaction rates, but you get loads of students, because of course, brings in the money. But that said, the thing about COVID-19 is, I guess we should look at it in the sense that it does present an opportunity. For those teachers and lecturers, teachers and learners in higher education who are listening today, I think the interesting thing about it is you've had to adapt. And some of you are quite tech savvy, a lot of you, nearly all of you, I guess, are already tech savvy. But even then, the transition to blended learning, the transition to full online learning is a distinct challenge regardless. And it's how we support each other and I suppose develop those opportunities and those ideas that will help shape us for the future. I think my view is partly, and we can have questions on this and add to this in the discussion today, but I guess my view is that it's sped up that process. Inevitably, as we know, it was always going to come in relation to looking at things like blended learning and online learning. It's just sped up the process. So now universities are thinking far more quickly and far more, intently about their online platforms, how engaging they are for students who may study remotely in the future. And of course, this isn't a new phenomenon as well. It's been going on for many years. You only need to see the advent of things like massive online open courses or MOOCs, of course, and the popularity that they had a few years ago. They were argued as being the future, potentially in higher education provision, giving people a taste and a tester from any kind of institution in terms of module-based components, not necessarily credit-bearing, but modular-based components in terms of that. So there's a load of interesting opportunities, and I guess that's the thing that I'm looking at today, I suppose, opportunity as opposed to catastrophe. I'm not trying to convince anybody in relation to that, but I guess that's some of the things that we can look at. Now, this is the first question. Now, I've changed this question just now whilst I was listening to that presentation, because I designed a question that was quite generic about online learning and so on and so forth. And I used the previous presentation actually to reinforce this. So I guess in some respects, this doesn't just deal with kind of online learning now, this deals with the future provision of teaching and learning on our programs. But I'd like your opinions and your ideas regarding to what advances HE, what can HE advances in teaching and learning play, what role can play in increasing pay, Peter stated, increasing and reducing hours, and increasing job stability as well. So pedagogically, I suppose the question that I'm asking is quite simply that. So from the stuff that we heard from the industry previously in the previous presentation, how do your modules start to cover and raise these questions, if indeed these are the fundamental questions, and somebody who runs a hospitality business with multi-million-pound turnover has stated this, so, it's pretty true. How do we do it? And if we don't do it, of course, how can we? So are there areas of best practice that you already start to look at, where you start to look at discussions regarding increasing pay in the hospitality industry? How should we approach those with students? Okay, based on the fact that it's quite difficult, it's a difficult challenge, because we're looking at essentially making change under an economic model which doesn't fit, realistically. At the moment in the UK, Rishi Sunak, who's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, is having his budget and spending review. He's currently talking in the House of Commons and releasing his budget. And he's argued as well that essentially with the increase in wage rises, as Peter stated, from Monday, there will inevitably be an increase in inflation and an increase in living costs as well. And of course, how businesses pass that on to the consumer, of course, will have a bearing in terms of the impact that it has on all of us and in terms of HE provision as well. Okay, so this is the first question. So you've got access to it on your Mentimeter now, on your mobile phone, tablet or laptop. For those of you online, hopefully you can gain access to this as well. And it's just a case of putting them in there. And I think, hopefully, we should start to see ideas come up. Now, again, this isn't about agreeing or developing ideas here or anything. Well, it's about developing ideas, but it's not about agreeing with me. There can be disagreement if it's not possible. Okay, how we can approach this. But I'm quite interested in hearing from everybody within this conference today, both here in person and online, as to their thoughts regarding this. Now, do you have to deal with all three? You don't. Select one, okay, that you feel is most significant for you, or that you have most of the, let's say, an opinion on in that respect, whether it be how do we incorporate increasing and reducing hours and increasing job stability as well. Okay, so good starting point there. Selecting partners for internships that fit the new expectations, which is interesting. Thank you for those of you. I should tell you as well, if this is completely anonymous, which is important. But then again, if you want to put your name in there, please put your name in there. Okay, that's part of that, but you don't have to. It's a really good point. Select partners for internships that fit new expectations. How we implement that logistically, I think, is quite interesting. Does that mean that institutions, for example, or ICE, a set of guidance, recommendations, provides a set of guidance or criteria for the types of hospitality, tourism and events businesses that we want to provide internships to our students that are based on increased pay, appropriate hours, and increasing job stability as well? And what is the challenges in relation to that? Does that create too little a pool of placement and internship opportunities for students, or is this just another form of lobbying? I think that's a really good point, that one. Is this just another form of lobbying where what we're essentially saying is, no, we're forcing the issue here as higher education. If we want to contribute to the ideas of increased pay and reducing hours, What we need to do is lobby. We need to lobby our industry and say, look, this is where we want to go. So as a result, we're going to use this organisation as opposed to you, but we really want to work with you. Now that has distinct challenges, but I really like that idea. Okay, can I provide that provision? What else have we got? Aggregation and integration of global labour market data sets to inform students of career opportunities. The global component there is really interesting, actually. Okay, because it's providing that international context of what a post-COVID hospitality, tourism and events industry will be. It's interesting that, I don't know, did anybody have any ideas in relation to what kind of examples of global labour market data sets potentially can be used for that within hospitality? Certainly we know that the challenge with data sets in relation to our industry sometimes is that it's how contemporary and how up-to-date they are. In relation to that, which can form a distinct challenge, particularly from tourism. I'm looking at, from my example as a lecturer in tourism here, the data seems to be out of date by a couple of years or so as a result, and that can have an impact, depending on where you look, of course, and depending on what context that you're looking at. What else have we got? Experiential learning to increase awareness. Experiential learning to increase awareness. Maybe worth clarifying what we mean by increasing awareness of what there, but it's a good point. That nature of what we deem to be experiential learning in the future, which I think is really important. That idea, essentially, how is that going to change when we incorporate these? This is a positive experience that we're trying to develop here. So what we're saying is we develop a set of criteria for hospitality, tourism and events businesses where we are selective for our internships based on the experiential nature that they provide that relates directly to favourable pay, appropriate hours, and job stability. I think linking into Peter's idea previously, this is why I developed it as a question just now, feverishly typing away on my phone, because is that the focal point, I guess, there in relation to where we can provide that change? Because we're influencing people through those internships by selecting a criteria to allow them to go, yeah, the hospitality industry, the tourism industry, the events industry isn't like the dog's body, isn't the perception of being low pay, large amount of hours that you have to work. Okay, there's largely a perception that that's a myth now. I don't think it is in some areas, realistically, but I think in a lot of areas it's myth still. In fact, I even had a discussion with a DMO, a destination management organisation in the UK just last week. We had a meeting with them where I said it's partly parental responsibility, that as well. Think about parents when you say, as a parent, your child says to you, I want to work in the hospitality industry in future. You know, and I know the industry, and initially I go, right, where do you want to work? You know, because you've got that worry, it's that perception that parents have, and of course parental influence in relation to that's a big thing as well. Anyway, experiential and that idea of increased workforce, I think is important. My apologies if we don't have the opportunity to go through everybody's here. Let's have a look. What else have we got? You can do this. Scroll kind of through. Let's look at the green one. Develop students' knowledge and critical thinking skills to understand the current world, but also to ask questions and prepare for and lead in the future. Okay? Don't we do that now? I guess. A little bit. We should do. In terms of that, the key thing about that idea that we were mentioning before about resilience and teaching resilience, I think I've argued that for a number of years as a module, within a generic module within university, how to teach students about resilience as a kind of core module, like within the first year, maybe a final year, to reinforce how we understand how to accept and go with change, because change is inevitable. You know, our industries are dynamic; they are for ever kind of working. Educate leaders with critical thinking skills. Now that's interesting. And that was where it's previously, as a previous part of the question in the previous presentation, because that looks at the market. And we're going to come on to that in a second, about that idea of market. But maybe the future, our future, pedagogically learning and teaching perspective in relation to hospitality, tourism and events, is maybe looking at the idea of, well, what are our source markets traditionally, and are they not the future of our sectors? Maybe we do need to look at the industry themselves and people who already work within it. And therefore, how would a degree work for somebody who is employed full time and somebody who is progressing through their career within their chosen industry. How will that look? Surely it can't look the same. And the current models that exist currently to allow that, in the form of things like sabbaticals, for example, or other forms of internship, apprenticeships in the UK, that's very popular at the moment as a discussion. Are they fit for purpose? And is there an opportunity for ourselves as a group of colleagues and institutions throughout ICE to maybe develop our understanding and implement something that's a little bit different, to perhaps enforce and make real change? Incorporating lean ways working into the curriculum would encourage efficiency. That's a really good point. That idea that essentially the nature of efficiency, we look at higher education is sometimes always argued as essentially, again, being somewhat overemphasizing the nature of things like critical analysis and thinking and so on and so forth. I was talking to another DMO a few weeks ago. I'm setting up a project for a group of students, and they said, yes, we've worked with the university before. To be honest, I'll be honest with you, we didn't get a lot out of it. And I asked why, and they said, because we didn't understand the word of what was produced. It was just like it came across as gobbledygook, and we didn't really understand how. Nothing told us in that document how stuff could be implemented. And it was that simple practicalities in some respects. How can you implement this? So being efficient in that sense, in terms of how we provide those opportunities, but also efficiency in relation to modules, I guess, as well. Where does that component of efficiency fit into modules in that sense? Helping find voices, encourage to build a better future. I think that's a really important thing as well. Helping to find voices. You know, that idea that essentially, I guess we all reinforce this to our students, that there is an opportunity there, essentially, that they can be the people who shape their industry into the future. They don't have to be bystanders. You know, even if there's a perception that they work their way up through an industry, they can make change with the smallest of subtle changes in innovative and creativity and so on and so forth. How do we install that? Okay. By all means, this isn't me just talking, so please, I've asked you for your opinions, but if anybody's got any disagreements or observations or things they want to add in relation to this, please, because this is like an open forum. I'm a moderator here, not really a presenter in that sense. Educate bold leadership. Our alumni have to foster positive change. That's a good one as well. I'm sure most institutions here have an alumni and how we work carefully with an alumni. There's a bit of conflict there, I guess, in some respects. Whose responsibility is it for alumni? Is it our responsibility as a program team, for example, from which to develop, or not? As part of that. Programs that enable graduates to provide answers rather than just asking questions. And that comes back to that reinforcing the benefit of those skills that they learn when in higher education. Critical analysis is beneficial in all walks of life, but it's the product that's produced at the end as a result of that process, which really everybody sees tangibly. You know? So thinking is great and problem solving is great, but solutions are the key as part of that. Okay? Now, I guess from these initial ones, I suppose what we're looking at here, and thank you for those of you who have contributed to that first question there. We'll move on to the second one. I guess this is food for thought, so I'm going to make this available to everybody. And I suppose the way that I'm going to use this is quite simply the way that I kind of approach all conferences in some respect, where I look at ideas that people have and think about practically how you could implement something, even a small little initiative. Like the field trip idea or anything like that, you know, just a small little initiative that maybe will enact a little bit of change here and there. Because of course, realistically, I'm a lecturer at the end of the day. Principally, my contract is based on teaching, scholarly activity, that type of stuff. Okay. I'd like to think that I enact change in my institution, but I'm also realistic that sometimes I don't get listened to, well, perhaps as much as I feel I should do, because I think I know everything. But it's an important component. But then again, making subtle, small changes pedagogically as part of the programs that we run and the modules that we teach upon fits our own, I suppose, strategy anyway, in terms of how we learn, how do we develop student quality. Part of that. Let's move on to the second one. You can add to these whenever you want. So I'm going to kind of keep it open, and you can add to them if you've got further points to make or further questions as part of that. Okay. Reuse. Now, have we already dealt with this? What should a degree in tourism and hospitality events look like in a post-COVID environment? Now, I've included some examples there. One example that I didn't include is essentially how we look at the idea of the nature of online learning and this change that we see. Are we moving towards, for example, or do any of you believe that we're moving towards far more fully remote teaching now, and therefore online courses as a method of delivery? And then realistically, how would that work? And how that works, of course, there's a number of options. And if anybody needs any more information about this or discussion, these kind of things, again, open forum, ladies and gentlemen. But firstly, increased scaffolding. So I'm sure you're aware of the concept of scaffolding. In a nutshell, I guess it's moving the idea from a teacher-centered approach of learning to a student-centered approach of learning. And it's not necessarily a tool in itself. It's a concept that essentially includes a variety of different tools and methods and approaches that you can utilize for this. Okay, I'll be honest with you, it's not a new concept either. Okay, it's sometimes argued as such, but not really. And to be honest, I bet you 99% of the people listening to me now already do it in some capacity without actually knowing that it's scaffolding. But how do we move towards more of an independent learner, where the emphasis is far more placed on students developing their journey, and the teacher acting more as a support mechanism and an instructor, providing those opportunities for debate at the start, and then gradually increasing the complexity and leaving them partially to their own devices, I guess. Okay, is that an option? Is that what the future of hospitality, tourism and events looks like? Or are we arguing that it's going to go back? Are we arguing that it's going to go back? It's difficult to argue this in the UK, increased scaffolding, when you're looking at increased independent nature, like a tourism program. Difficult to argue because students in the UK, home students, pay £9,250 at the moment. So for that per year, plus everything else that has to go on top of that, there is a student in the right mentality prior to entering university where they feel that that is value for money. And of course, other institutions where payment is included as well. Value for money is about support and increased support. Now, scaffolding does allow that for support, but it also questions it as well. It questions and it argues that support should be taken away. It can't be left there because students become over-reliant on it in the future. So those support mechanisms where you act as a lecturer supporting students in that development allow for that. Apprenticeships, working on the job. So full-time employees essentially developing, working on a degree as they go through their job and work full-time within their chosen industry. Is that the future of hospitality and tourism? And I guess this links into also micro-credentials. So again, if you just need a quick definition of micro-credentials, the idea that essentially you have a very small, let's say, module or component or resource that you study, and it gives you credentials that you can then culminate and add to then do a degree. And that's interesting. That's what was in the Org report in 2019 in the UK. The recommendation to the government was that they implement this process of lifelong learning by incorporating micro-credentials in there. And of course, recognition of a credit framework as well. You know, I'm sure most of you know that like the institutions, countries are signed up to what's called the Bologna Agreement, where essentially there should be just kind of easily transferable credit frameworks throughout institutions, higher educational institutions in Europe. It's in practice, it works in some examples really well, but it's also quite difficult to do because it's not so comparable credit frameworks in that sense. So it can be a distinct challenge to do. I think if it was easy, a lot more institutions will be doing it and sharing this. Added to the fact, again, with the UK, things like Erasmus at the moment. Erasmus now defunct, it's moving towards this Turing approach, this Turing project, essentially, that allows something similar, but we don't know how that's going to work. It's all a bit of a particular challenge in terms of that. Yes, please.
And money, I mean, the moment that you collaborate, the main fear from many authorities is that we give the income generation to the other institution because they're collaborating, so they'll want to be paid for that. So our fees then reduce because some of that has to go to them. And that comes up almost at the start of all these discussions.
Yeah.
Who's going to pay for this? Really? Do we have to start with that? Is that really the starting point?
Plus, you might end up losing a student.
Or you might,
to the
yeah,
to the hosting
indeed.
with a favourable institution.
That's just like
Not because it's better,
Yeah, yeah.
not just because it's a better fit
Yeah.
for that singular student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, you know, again, and I'm sure you know, perhaps you've thought about this in different ways as well. You know, the students they're individualistic in terms of their wants and needs. Curriculums can be very similar in that sense, but it's everything. It's the whole journey throughout university and everything that's offered on campus and so on and so forth, which again can attract certain students.
Yeah.
So there is a challenge. That's really interesting as well about how do you overcome that challenge. Therefore, you know.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one. What have we got here? Ubiquitous, collaborative, co-productions of knowledge, multimodal, big data assessment for learning. Lots of big words in there. Cool. Co-production, co-creation as well as part of that. That's a really good one because that signifies, actually I have to say, it'd be interesting to know who said that, because that signifies almost like a fundamental change in relation to the structure of a program, potentially. For it to work, can you adopt that type of approach under the current traditional structure of a degree program? And particularly for those of you who are collaborative institutions, for example, who are picking up somebody else's degree or an institution's degree, how do you influence change if you believe that that's the way forward to effectively enact that change from a host institution? It's hard to do, you know? But then again, maybe it's just the opportunity for those type of discussions to take place. Is that what's initially required? Are we saying, what about moving to this? What about moving to this model? And of course, what would that look like? A number of universities in the UK, again, some of them post-COVID are moving completely online now. Not because of the issue of COVID and the worry regarding health and safety on campus, but because they feel that now is the time to make that move, to go fully online. So there are no face-to-face programs within some areas, it's all online.
Yeah, that one was me, and I identify with your point because these are all cool ideas, but the problem behind it all is mindsets, isn't it? Having some to change mindset to want to move to this futuristic. So we can talk all day long about what it's going to be like in the future if the decision makers and the people on the ground don't have the want or the need or the competency to evolve. Or having a fixed mindset, we'll say, as the way we're talking about, as opposed to a growth mindset, will then you're stuck with all of these points.
It's true. I mean, we've had examples of that. You know, I mean, I'm completely honest about that. A few years ago, we came up with the idea was to make the credit framework far more flexible, to have things like potentially 10 credit modules, 5 credit modules, look at the hours that were apportioned to them, and therefore create more of a diverse offering, which wouldn't enact an increased workload on staff. Quality systems within the university turned that down and said you can't do it, which was frustrating for us, because then we had to go and sit down and say, well, we're going to have to operate what we want to do under this traditional system. Lo and behold, a couple of years later, another bloody program did it, and they got the green light and got it all approved. So maybe they thought that essentially a program like tourism or hospitality or events wasn't fit for that form and purpose. Which, to be honest, therefore, I look at that and say that's my fault, really, because I should have lobbied them. All these people, when you have meetings with executive, and if any of you have the ear of executives within institutions, bend their ear for those opportunities to maybe to be a bit more kind of, let's say, empowered to make those changes and those suggestions. It's better to ask now and to get turned down than to put in all the effort and the work and then to say, well, no, computer says no, you know, in relation to that, which is the shame. And of course, what we're arguing here is that it will change. You know, will degrees in the UK, for example, look exactly the same? Tourism, hospitality, and events degrees in around about 20 or 30 years' time? No, they won't, because I don't think they'll exist. You know, Peter already said that, for example, when you look at the workforce in the UK, the perception of hospitality in higher education, but also within the industry as well, it's not initially at the moment an attractive career from which to develop for a lot of people, which is a crying shame because of the potential benefits that you can get from it. We need to force that kind of change in some respects. And I can quite easily sit down and say that it's not my responsibility to do that, but it kind of is. Bending the ear executive, working as a group with ICE to look at the opportunities that it presents itself, you know, strength in numbers, as we say. You know, we know, because I've talked to a lot of you already, that there's some fantastic work being done within your programs some like fantastic work. And that's not just sharing it, but that's lobbying for change. We know that essentially when we make changes, essentially it can have real positive effect on the student experience, the institution as a whole. And therefore there should be that opportunity from which to take forward. Keeping an eye on the time. More collaborative sessions, product with academic partners. Definitely, I agree with that one wholeheartedly. And I think something like the ICE gives the opportunity to really develop that, to be honest. The question is how, but then again, we can start off small and to develop nothing grandeur, nothing big, starting off small, something straightforward to develop, get our teeth into to begin with. I think there's a great opportunity there. And of course, students are more averse to the idea of online and collaborative learning now due to COVID-19. One of the solutions as opposed to the challenges there. We have lost learning and teaching facts. YouTube has won that. We need to develop phronesis, practical wisdom. It's an interesting idea there as well. It's interesting that, because on the one side, again, if you look at current pedagogic models, there's a suggestion of moving away from the concept of facts, indeed, and this idea of teaching towards the test, for example, you know, and the learning agreement that you develop, where you tick a box in terms of the indicative content that needs to be demonstrated by a student. How is that beneficial for an industry? Well, it has its benefits, we have to say. It does have its benefits in relation to knowledge and understanding, but maybe extending it, not so much. The key thing is this idea of phronesis and this idea of this practical wisdom, how we develop that, how you guys develop that from your degree as well, you know, and having that ability to. Not just obviously having the opportunity to work in places like, you know, and work in experiences like this, but also within those sessions as well. Okay, it's your job. And these are very similar to some of these. Agile, flexible, collaborative should integrate the important notion of change, crisis, flexibility. That's a really interesting idea. If you think about the idea that for example, programs have as well. Look at the pool of resource that we have here. Where are programs here considering if they had the opportunity to develop modules in resilience, crisis management, for example, these kind of components? Look at the pool of talent that we have as an opportunity for like a collaborative module in there, you know, of which it provides that, where potentially we could share those resources, you know, share those opportunities to develop indicative content in these areas. Yeah, I don't know what you're like when you look at a validation like that. My background is not crisis management. So if I'm asked by the university to write a module in crisis management, I then go to the library for a good 2 solid days and look at all these books on crisis management and try and work out, and then look at modules comparably and try and work out what on earth I'm supposed to be doing. The problem with that, of course, is that when you get to the point of teaching it, or somebody does, they look at it and go, what the hell's all this? How am I going to implement this in any kind of, let's say, some practical way? And of course, the collaborative nature of ICE and the institution itself maybe provides that opportunity a little bit. I don't know. Provides, you know, it needs a bit of leadership and guidance in relation to that, but there's a great opportunity there. Well, I was going to go just onto the last one. My apologies. All these will be used, ladies and gentlemen, as part of this. You can see here, the degree must be designed by the industry and not solely by academia. That's a good point. Don't get me started on that because I'll be here for the next hour in terms of that. And I guess this is the final question, your thoughts and opinions on it. Is the current global provision of tourism, hospitality and events education sustainable based on current demand and supply? So what's your opinions about this? Whether you work in teaching and learning or lecturing, are there too many providers? How long will market demand last to accommodate this supply? And how can we look at specialising through institutional, what I call their product differentiation? So maybe looking at, can we specialise our degrees in the future? I guess if you look at like ICE as a kind of collaborative concept, is there an opportunity to look at specialisation between institutions? We know it's far more difficult than that. If you think about it, well, some things are always going to be popular than others. And a lot of institutions go, well, I'll tell you what, I'll have this because it's got the most students in and that means the money. But within there is a seed from which to look at how we specialise, and maybe it's that collaborative work that some of you mentioned before, okay? As part of that. Finding statistics in relation to how many institutions, let's say in a continent like Europe, for example, and including the UK in there, how many institutions teach hospitality, tourism and events programs is difficult is difficult to find, and it depends what you look at. It's ranging. We do know that it's in the thousands. You know, there are thousands of institutions within Europe who teach this at the HE level. Some of them are college-based, starting with FE, and then feeder institutions, and then other ones are HE. And we also include postgraduate qualifications in there as well. But these are thousands of institutions. There's a lot there, of course. And when we look at the current, as it's been alluded to today, the current crisis within hospitality, maybe there is an opportunity for the hospitality industry and academia to look at it and say, okay, well, what is the provision? What is the specialization? You know, to be honest, I know this better than everybody else, because a few years ago, I designed, at the request of the university executive, somebody on the board of governance at the university, I designed an ecotourism program, a Bachelor of Science in Ecotourism. And it wasn't successful. It lasted for like 3 years. And why? Because numbers weren't high and it was expensive. Brilliant course, though, I have to say. When I was program leader for it as well, and within all the national student surveys, it got 100%, which I was quite happy with, or very happy with. But it didn't last. It didn't last because the specialization was argued at the end. It was just too specific. It wasn't bringing in the numbers. And of course, that is a unique challenge. But it's product differentiation, how we do it. But maybe if we group these ideas together, and if we think about the idea of things like micro-credentials, if we think about the ideas of working with industry and internships, if we look at the ideas of that concept of lifelong learning, maybe the solution lies in not just one area of how we differentiate, but in all these components, how we work with industry, how we provide small credit components throughout a suite of institutions that recognize them straightforwardly and easily, from which to build a degree over a period of a few years, which you can still work in the industry. And therefore, the specialization can come from studying online here, and then studying face-to-face here, and then doing essentially blended learning at this institution, module specialization, through collaborative work institutionally, through a variety. Maybe that's the future of what this is suggesting here as part of this. I've got one comment on here. The economic model behind hospitality education is actively being destroyed by the industry. Okay. It's a good point. Let me digest that. The economic model behind hospitality education is actively being destroyed by the industry. I mean, thing is though, it's an option, you know, and it's certainly it's a perspective in terms of how we work with the industry. I think that's a distinct challenge that we can all kind of empathise with in some respect. That it's not necessarily the hospitality industry's fault, let's say, or the tourism industry or the events industry in that sense. It's maybe the fact that the process of communication between there isn't as fluid as we want, and it's a challenging thing to do. You know, we speak to industry as much as we can. Mainly, it takes place in program design at a validation stage, a revalidation stage, when we're building modules and we're building programs, and we bring industry in and say, right, here you go, what do you think? And they say, like that, don't like that. What's the point of that? There's no, you know. And then you say, okay, well, you can't have everything that you want, but, and that helps contribute towards that validation process.
I think that system only really works if you find a niche. If you're trying to continue talking about the industry and its all vastness, this will never work.
It's a really good point. Because again, when somebody asked just now in Peter's presentation, the idea of what do you look for in a graduate? Look at what he said there. There was no skill-based components in there. You know, it was all the idea of I need somebody to be enthusiastic about their industry, passionate, empathise with customers, to be resilient, all those type of things. They're quite generic components there. We're not saying let's get rid of skills, because of course they're really important. But maybe that's the opportunity. Maybe the idea of that destruction of the hospitality industry maybe isn't necessarily the fault of the industry itself. It's the culmination between industry and academia. That's how we see that. Too many providers trying to do too much and too many to too little. We must choose either to go mass produce or go deluxe boutique. Indeed. And of course, they're the options. You know, we still look at that. I still remember tourism at the University of Derby of gaining around about 100 to 150 students just on tourism. You know, those days are long gone. And there's a variety of reasons for it. But it's not like this mass market anymore. And you can see the trend in higher education in other disciplines. Geography is the same. geography went through, they're getting loads and loads of students on, and then it dipped off massively because stuff like tourism came along. People realised that they could specialise in an area of human geography, for example, and also study an industry. And then the events industry came along. Of course. So I'm going to make these. Please do update them. And if you can't do, and if you've got any other points that you'd like to make that you want to add to this, and you can't access the Mentimeter, then please email me. My link is at the start there, but my contact details, I'll provide them anyway. If you want to drop me an email, it's on the University of Derby website, and I'll add your comments to this as well, if you want to provide. The only other final thing that I wanted to say was further thoughts providing HE provision, and there is another 3 R's that come into environment now, and that's rethink, renew, and refuse. And I think these are kind of some of the components that we've discussed today a little bit. The idea that we're rethinking models, essentially collaboratively, of how we develop our academic subject areas. Renew, that idea of essentially developing something that's already existing by constant innovation, and the discussions that we've had today and yesterday as well regarding working collaboratively, but working with e-learning capacities and platforms and so on and so forth, and innovative technology, I think, is potentially a way forward in relation to that. And also, as a final point, refuse. If I was to make one suggestion as a lecturer, for anybody who does have decisions in terms of workload planning and so on and so forth, I would say if you want quality in teaching and learning, quality in pedagogy in tourism, hospitality and events, let lecturers do what they do. Let lecturers teach. Let them produce high quality materials. Give them the opportunity to be creative. And I'm not saying that you don't and institutions don't, but there is an increased amount of bureaucracy and administration within teaching roles that I think is taking away the opportunity to be creative. So when we talked, Chris, about the idea of incorporating those virtual field trips and collaboratively, the first thing that was on my mind is, when am I going to get time to do that? Because I don't get time really to prepare my own material as much as I want to at the moment. And now I'm thinking about developing other stuff. I'm running away with myself. Do I have the time? And I guess partly there's a refusal there. You know? I'm not saying be rebellious and essentially challenging authority, because of course administration does have its role. But giving people the opportunity to develop that creative output is key. It's key for developing our subject areas. And everything that we've discussed today, as part of that, and your thoughts in relation to this, are really important as well. So thank you very much for listening to me today. Thank you for those guys online. Thank you for your input today. Like I said, I'm going to make them available to Craig. I'll probably put it into some sort of capacity from which people can have a look at, and then, yeah, okay, perfect. In fact, I might get the students to help me as a bit of a data exercise as well. So thanks so much, guys. I have got a final slide that's saying take any questions, but I'm now running 1 minute over time. So if anybody's got any questions, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to Duncan for that. I must commend Duncan for the way that he's been able to integrate the people in the room and the people online as well. I think it's a really accessible way where everyone can contribute. There was in the chat, could you please just go to the chat, just to draw your attention to a couple of things, because we couldn't see it in the room when the presentation was taking place. So
yes, I've seen that before. Who's that? Catherine. Yeah, thank you, Kat. I've seen that before. In terms of that, providing that, thanks so much for that. It's really good. It might be a good idea to share that as well in terms of some of the links and the opportunities there, because there's a number of other places that do it as well in terms of virtual field trips. For non-profit making organisations as well, where they bring in local communities who can do virtual field trips and then ask for a donation from the participants at the end. And if you think, yeah, if a student was to give, like you've got a group of 20 students, if they were to give €1 each as part of that donation virtually, I don't know how that would work with university finances. It wouldn't. Who cares? Let's do it anyway. But yeah, it's really good. Thank you for that.
So once again, thank you to Duncan for his session, and a token of appreciation from
Another University of Derby bag. Thank you for that. I will cherish it.
So thank you very much, Duncan.